The rain that night didn't fall so much as attack the city, sheets of silver water hammering every rooftop, flooding the gutters, turning Portland's quiet streets into rivers of reflected light. Dr. Emily Hart drove through it on autopilot, wipers squealing, eyes unfocused. Her hands still smelled faintly of iodine and failure. The shepherd hadn't made it. 3 hours on the operating table, her whole soul poured into a heart that refused to beat again. She could still hear the flatline echoing in her ears as she turned into her driveway, headlights slicing across the white siding of the house she'd grown up in. The same house that hadn't felt like home since the accident. She killed the engine but didn't move. The dashboard clock blinked 2:58 a.m. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the silence felt heavier. She stared at the dark windows and imagined, for a second, her mom's silhouette passing the kitchen sink, her dad reading the sports page by the lamp. Then the memory broke apart like mist, leaving only the rain. Emily finally grabbed her duffel and stepped into the downpour. Cold water soaked through her scrubs in seconds, mixing with the faint rust-colored stains of a night she wanted to forget. She sprinted toward the porch, 10 steps across the driveway, and stopped. Something dark streaked the concrete by the garage door. At first she thought, oil. But the color was wrong. Even through the rain, it gleamed black-red under her headlights.
Too thick.
Too fresh.
Blood.
It trailed from the driveway to the cracked side door of her garage. Her pulse kicked hard. Logic barked its orders. Go inside, lock the doors, call 911, but instinct whispered something else. That much blood meant someone was hurt badly, and hurt people didn't have hours to wait for help. She hesitated on the porch, soaked and shivering. This was insane. She was a veterinarian, not an EMT. Whoever was bleeding could be dangerous. She could end up on tomorrow's news as local vet found dead after playing hero. She actually heard her mother's voice in her head. Emily, you can't save everyone, but maybe you try anyway. She tightened her grip on her keys, breath fogging in the cold, and wondered, what would you have done? If you saw a trail of blood sliding into your garage at 3 a.m, would you walk away? Or would you follow it, knowing it might change your life forever? Emily already knew her answer. She just wished it were different. She popped open the Subaru's glove box and pulled out her flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a blade as she crossed the puddled driveway and pushed open the side door. The hinges screamed. Inside, the familiar scent of motor oil and cardboard greeted her, but underneath it, sharp and metallic, iron, unmistakable. Hello, she called, voice trembling. Is someone? The flashlight caught him before the question finished. A man, collapsed against the far wall between stacks of tires and a broken lawnmower. His head tilted sideways, black hair plastered to his forehead. Expensive suit ruined. The whole right side of his body soaked crimson. Her breath hitched. God. She dropped to her knees beside him. The concrete was slick with blood. She pressed 2 fingers to his throat there. A pulse, thready but alive. Hey, she whispered. Can you hear me? No response. She eased his hand away from the wound. One clean hole, left abdomen, small, precise. A gunshot. The exit wound? None. The bullet was still inside. A pistol lay inches from his open hand, matte black, heavy. Emily's stomach twisted. Whoever he was, this wasn't random. She should have backed away. She should have called the cops. But instead her brain snapped into clinical focus, the rhythm she knew best. Assess. Control bleeding. Stabilize. Okay, she muttered, more to herself than him. Okay, stay with me, stranger. She sprinted inside, grabbed the emergency kit she kept for wildlife rescues, The one she'd never admit to owning because most of it wasn't cleared for human use, and returned within seconds. The rain battered the roof as she spread towels, snapped on gloves, and cleaned the wound with trembling hands. "Come on," she murmured, forcing air past the panic. "You didn't crawl here just to die on me." Her flashlight wobbled on a nearby shelf, throwing restless shadows across the walls as she probed gently with a forceps. The bullet was lodged deep, angled upward, missed vital organs by sheer luck.
Lucky.
Absurdly lucky. When metal finally scraped against metal, she exhaled, easing it free. The bullet dropped into an empty coffee can with a sharp clink. For a moment she just stared at it, heart pounding. Then the blood surged faster. "Of course," she muttered, grabbing gauze, pressing down hard. The man groaned faintly, eyelids fluttering. "Good," she said. "That's good. Stay with me."
Breathe.
Her movements steadied. Layer by layer, she stitched. Muscle. Subcutaneous tissue.
Skin.
The kind of neat, tiny sutures that spoke of years of precision practice. By the time she tied the last knot, dawn was creeping through the fogged garage window, painting everything pale gray. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve, realizing she was shaking. The man's breathing had evened out, color returning, pulse stronger. She'd done it. She'd pulled a bullet out of a stranger on her garage floor and kept him alive. And now what? Call 911 and explain why she had illegal anesthetics in her kit? Tell them she'd operated on a man with a gun instead of waiting for help? Her career would be over before sunrise. Emily looked at his face again. Even unconscious, he radiated something, command, danger, a kind of weary dignity.
Who are you?
Rain softened outside, the first light of morning glinting off the coffee can beside her, the bullet inside gleaming like a secret she could never take back. She sank onto her heels, breathing hard, and realized something terrifyingly clear. She'd saved him. And in doing so, she'd just changed her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The rain had stopped by the time Emily dragged the man into her living room. Her arms trembled with exhaustion. He was heavier than he looked, solid muscle beneath the torn suit. She'd used an old horse tarp to pull him across the floor, wincing every time he groaned softly. Now he lay on her couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, and 4-line running from his arm to a bag she'd rigged using a lamp hook and leftover veterinary fluids. His breathing was shallow but steady. Emily stood over him, hair dripping, scrubbed stiff with blood and rain. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was gone, leaving behind only the quiet ache of fatigue and disbelief. She'd committed at least 3 felonies before sunrise. Failure to report a gunshot wound. Practicing medicine on a human. Harboring someone who clearly wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, she didn't regret it. Not yet. The morning sun slid through the blinds, striping his face in gold. He looked calmer now. Younger, maybe. Peaceful in a way that made her uneasy. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And what kind of trouble followed you here?" Her own question echoed through the quiet house. She didn't want to know the answer. Not really. Knowing would make her part of it. But the truth was already inside these walls. She pressed a hand to her eyes and exhaled. She should call someone. The police. An ambulance. Anyone. But her phone stayed where she'd dropped it on the counter, dark and silent. Maybe she'd already chosen her side the moment she pressed her hands against that wound. She showered until the water ran cold, trying to wash away everything, the blood, the fear, the weight of his breathing echoing through the walls. But the image wouldn't leave her. That face, that bullet, the strange stillness of it all. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, The house felt wrong.
Too still.
Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, felt like a warning. By 8, she brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and sat across from him, studying the stranger she'd saved. He hadn't moved. Color had crept back into his cheeks, his lips no longer pale. He looked almost human now, almost safe. But she could see the tension in his jaw, even unconscious. The kind of man who never truly rested. "Great," she muttered, harboring an armed stranger. "Perfect life choices, Emily." At 9, she called the clinic. "Dr. Hart? Everything okay?"
Dr. Harris asked.
"Yeah, just a stomach bug," she lied. "Probably something from the shelter. I'll be out a few days."
He laughed.
"You? Taking time off? That's a first." "Guess I'm overdue," she said softly, then hung up. Guilt stung. Not for lying, but for how easily it came. She turned off her phone and looked back at the couch. The man's presence filled the room. Not physically, spiritually. Like the air itself bent around him. The ruined suit, the gun she'd hidden under her father's old jacket in the hall closet, the precision of the wound. It all told the same story. This man wasn't a random victim. But she couldn't ignore what she felt when she looked at him. Responsibility. She'd saved him. And maybe, in a strange way, she wanted him to wake up. Hours passed. She replaced his 4, checked his pulse, cleaned the sutures. Every task gave her a sense of control she didn't really have. Then, as she bent to adjust the blanket, his hand twitched. His eyes shot open. Emily gasped and stumbled back as he lurched upward, one hand clutching his side, the other searching for something unseen. His breathing was harsh, wild. "Hey," she said quickly, raising both hands. "Don't move. You'll rip your stitches." He froze, blinking against the light, trying to make sense of where he was. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across metal. "My house," she said carefully. "You collapsed in my garage. You were shot. I took the bullet out." He blinked, gaze flicking from the 4 to her face. "You're a doctor?" "Veterinarian," she corrected. "You were dying. I improvised." He stared at her for a long moment. "You should have called the police." "Maybe," she said. "But you didn't exactly give me the impression that the police were your friends."
His jaw tightened.
Slowly, he lowered himself back onto the couch, grimacing at the pull of his wound. "You're right," he said finally. "They're not." Emily stood there, arms folded, studying him. The way he moved, controlled, deliberate, wasn't like a civilian. Even half-conscious, he carried the presence of someone used to danger. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated.
"Ryan."
"Ryan Cole." She nodded, not sure she believed it. "Okay, Ryan Cole. You want to tell me why someone shot you?" He gave a dry half-smile. "Wrong place, wrong time." "That's vague." "That's the point." Emily watched him, her instincts torn between compassion and common sense. "Well, Ryan, you can add blood out in my garage to your list of wrong places." He almost laughed, and then winced as pain twisted his expression. "I'll keep that in mind." "Good," she said softly. "Now stay still. You move, you bleed. You bleed, you die. I didn't drag your heavy ass in here for nothing." He gave her a look, something between respect and disbelief. "Emily." Hearing her name in his voice startled her. "Yeah, you saved my life." It wasn't gratitude he spoke, it was certainty. Quiet, grounded, sincere. The kind of sentence that didn't need embellishment. She didn't know what to do with it. "Don't thank me yet. You could still mess up my stitches." A flicker of amusement crossed his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." When she left the room, her heart was still hammering. That night, She sat alone at the kitchen table, untouched coffee cooling beside her. The house creaked around her as rain returned, softer this time. She couldn't stop hearing his voice. "You saved my life." People said that in movies all the time, but it felt different when you'd wash the blood off your hands yourself. It meant something heavier. Something binding. Once you saved someone's life, didn't part of it somehow become yours? Emily stared into the dark and wondered, not for the first time that night, if saving him had been mercy, or the beginning of something she couldn't undo. And she asked herself the question that kept circling her mind. If you found a bleeding stranger in your garage, would you risk your life to help him, or close the door and walk away? She already knew her answer. Emily didn't sleep that night. The storm had faded into silence, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the image of him, Ryan Cole, lying on her couch like a ghost that refused to leave. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood, the bullet, the way his eyes looked when he said those words. "You saved my life." She told herself she'd drive him to a hospital first thing in the morning. She'd leave him there, no questions asked. That was the plan. But morning came and she didn't. Instead, she found herself reheating soup, checking his temperature, and pretending it was temporary. Pretending that she wasn't terrified of what she might learn if she dug deeper. When Ryan woke again, sunlight poured across the living room, soft and golden. He blinked, disoriented, then found her sitting nearby, arms folded. "Still here?" he asked quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "You're on my couch. You're lucky I didn't dump you at the ER and move states." He smirked faintly, winced, then said, "You've got a smart mouth for a doctor." "Veterinarian," she corrected again, standing. "And you've got a bullet wound. So maybe don't test me." He studied her for a long beat. His gaze wasn't threatening, it was curious, analytical. The kind of look that saw more than it should. "You risked a lot," he said finally. "For a stranger." Emily crossed her arms. "Don't flatter yourself. It was impulse. You were bleeding all over my floor. I panic-save things. Dogs, birds, mysterious men who crawl into my garage." That almost earned a laugh. Almost. He leaned back, closing his eyes, breathing slow and careful. "Still, thank you." The words hung there longer than they should have. She busied herself cleaning up the empty bag, avoiding his gaze. "You can thank me by not dying on my furniture." But behind the dry sarcasm, something shifted, something small, like the first hairline crack in a dam. By afternoon, she'd convinced herself to set boundaries. He needed rest, not conversation. She'd let him heal, then send him away. Simple. But life, she was learning, had a cruel sense of humor. At 4:12 p.m., the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the quiet like a blade. Emily froze mid-step, heart jumping. No one visited her. Not unannounced. She looked toward the couch. Ryan was half asleep again, head turned toward the sound. His brow furrowed instantly, as if some old reflex kicked in. The bell rang again. "Stay here," she whispered.
He didn't argue.
But his hand drifted subtly toward his side, where the gun should have been. Emily felt her pulse spike. She'd hidden it in the hall closet. She crept to the front door, glancing through the peephole. Two men stood on the porch. Black suits. One holding a phone. The other scanning the neighborhood like he'd done it 1,000 times. Every instinct in her body screamed wrong. "Who is it?" Ryan's voice was quiet but sharp behind her. Emily turned, startled. "You shouldn't be up." "Who's at the door?" "I don't know." He moved closer, slow but deliberate. The air around him seemed to thicken with tension. He wasn't just watching, he was calculating. "Don't open it," he said. "I wasn't planning to." Ryan's eyes darted toward the window. He limped closer, keeping low, and risked a glance outside. The blood drained from his face. FBI, she guessed. He gave a grim, humorless smile. Worse. The knock came this time, 3 hard raps. Miss Hart, one of the men called. His tone was smooth, polite. Too polite. This is Agent Reese with the Bureau. We'd like a moment of your time. Emily looked at Ryan. His eyes said everything. Don't move.
Don't speak.
She swallowed hard, stepped back from the door, and whispered, What do they want? They're not FBI, he said, voice low. They're looking for me. Who are you? Ryan didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the door, his muscles tense. The knock came again, louder. Dr. Hart, we have some questions regarding an incident near the waterfront last night. We have reason to believe a suspect may be injured. Please open the door. Emily's blood went cold. Waterfront. The same night. She realized then, he hadn't just been in the wrong place. He'd been in the center of something terrible. Ryan looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily, please. Don't let them in. Something in his tone, urgent, almost desperate, cut through her fear. He wasn't asking out of arrogance. He was asking out of survival. The kind that didn't beg unless it truly mattered. She turned off the porch light, heart hammering. The 2 men outside exchanged a glance. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, after a long pause, one said, We'll be in touch. Their footsteps retreated into the rain-soaked street. Emily stood frozen until the sound of their car faded. Only then did she breathe again. When she turned, Ryan was leaning against the wall, pale, drenched in sweat. You shouldn't be standing, she said, rushing to him. He shook his head, gripping her arm for balance. You shouldn't have answered. I didn't. But you need to start explaining, because I'm one step away from dragging you outside myself. He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret. Resignation. You want the truth, he said quietly. You saved a man everyone else wants dead. Emily's stomach turned cold. Who are you? His voice dropped to a near whisper. The people outside weren't cops. They work for a man named Bennett. He used to be my partner. She waited. He met her gaze, unflinching. I used to run things for him. Until I didn't. Until I tried to walk away. Emily stared, the pieces falling into place. The suit.
The gun.
The precision. You're in the mob. Ryan's expression didn't change. I was. The room spun. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had saved a man from a world she'd only seen in headlines. Money, power, violence. And now he was in her house. You should go, she whispered.
Right now.
I can't, he said. If I step outside, they'll finish the job. You open that door tonight, you're already in it. Her heart pounded so loud, she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to scream, to demand why this had landed on her doorstep. But all that came out was a whisper. What did you do to them? Ryan's jaw clenched. I told the truth. Emily looked at him then. Not the man bleeding on her couch, but the man carrying a past too dangerous to name. She had no idea what truth he'd told. But deep down, something told her it was about to destroy everything she thought she understood about right and wrong. And once again, she found herself wondering, what would you have done? Would you protect a man like him, or hand him over to the world waiting outside? Because Emily Hart didn't have that luxury anymore. She'd already made her choice. The house was silent again, but it wasn't peace that filled it. It was tension, sharp, invisible, coiled in every corner. Emily stood by the window long after the black car disappeared down the street. The rain had thinned into mist, yet her heart still beat like it was caught in a storm. Behind her, Ryan lay on the couch, half reclined, eyes closed but far from asleep. He looked different now, not just wounded but haunted. He'd said the words so simply. I told the truth. But there was something in his voice that sounded like confession and punishment. Emily wanted to ask, what truth? But part of her didn't want the answer. Because answers had consequences. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than she meant it to be. You said those men work for Bennett, your old partner. What kind of partner are we talking about? Ryan opened his eyes, meeting hers. There was no bravado left in him, only weariness. The kind you shake hands with once and never trust again. It wasn't enough, but it was all he was willing to give. Emily turned away, fingers curling against her arms. She'd spent her whole life helping creatures that couldn't speak, couldn't explain the pain they carried. Now she'd saved a man who wouldn't. And yet, for reasons she couldn't name, she didn't want him to leave. Maybe it was the loneliness she carried, a quiet ache that had followed her since her parents' accident. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her when he said, "You saved my life," like she'd done something holy in a world that had forgotten mercy. Whatever it was, it scared her more than the men in suits. She found herself whispering, almost to the empty room, "You should rest. You'll need your strength." Ryan gave a faint nod. "You should lock the doors." "I already did." "Good," he said. "Keep them locked." His voice carried something unspoken, a promise or a warning. She couldn't tell which. The next 2 days passed like a dream she couldn't wake from. Ryan slept in fits, waking only to drink water or mutter half-formed memories that made no sense. Names she didn't recognize. Streets she'd never heard of. And once, in the middle of the night, she heard him whisper a woman's name, Chloe. The sound of it cracked something inside her. Emily didn't know who Chloe was, lover, sister, ghost, but it wasn't her place to ask. She kept her distance, though her mind never left the living room. Every morning she told herself, "Today I'll call the police." Every night she found another reason not to, because every time she looked at him, she saw not a criminal, but a man running from a shadow bigger than himself. And she couldn't bring herself to be the one who handed him back to it. On the third morning, she woke to find him gone. Panic clawed at her chest until she saw the front door still locked. Then she heard movement outside, slow, uneven footsteps near the garage. She grabbed her jacket and hurried out. Ryan stood there, leaning against the open garage door, looking out at the misty street. He wore one of her father's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, bandages hidden beneath the fabric. The light hit him softly, turning the steam of his breath to silver. He looked like someone half forgotten by the world, a man who had burned his bridges and stood at their ashes, too proud to admit he missed the fire. "You shouldn't be out here," she said quietly. He smiled without turning. "I've been worse." "That's not the point." He finally looked at her, eyes dark but calm. "You ever wonder how people end up where they do?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured vaguely toward the street. "How one choice, one wrong deal, one lie you didn't tell fast enough, can rewrite everything. You spend years thinking you can control it. Then one night you wake up in a stranger's garage bleeding out, wondering if this is where it all was supposed to lead." She studied him for a long moment, the breeze tugging at her hair. "I don't believe anyone deserves that," she said. His gaze softened, just slightly. "You'd be surprised." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the distant hum of a city and the soft patter of mist on concrete filled the silence. Then he said it low, almost like a confession. "I told Bennett I was done. I wanted out. I was supposed to disappear. He didn't like that. So he sent those men," Emily murmured. Ryan nodded once. "He doesn't forgive betrayal. Not even when you're trying to save him from himself." Emily's throat tightened. Save him? Ryan's jaw clenched. He started something bad. Something that'll burn more than just me. I tried to stop it. Stop what? He hesitated, then looked at her with quiet urgency. You don't want to know. The less you do, the safer you'll be. She stepped closer, voice trembling. You think safety still exists for me? You brought this to my door. His silence was apology enough. That night, she couldn't stop pacing. She told herself she wasn't afraid, that she was only angry. But fear has a way of wearing other faces. Each time a car passed, she flinched. Each creak of the house felt like a warning. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, she realized she wasn't just afraid of the men outside. She was afraid of how deeply she already cared about the man inside. Because compassion is dangerous when it becomes attachment. And she could feel it, that slow, quiet pull towards something she couldn't define. She leaned against the kitchen counter, staring into the dark living room where Ryan slept fitfully on the couch. Every part of her wanted to believe there was still good left in him, something worth saving. But what if she was wrong? What if saving him meant losing herself? And if you were in her shoes, watching danger sleep under your roof, would you still protect him? Or would you make the call that ended it all? Sometimes the line between mercy and madness is just one sleepless night apart. Dawn crept across the kitchen floor in thin gold lines, and Emily watched the light crawl over the couch where Ryan slept. He looked almost peaceful, almost normal, like a man who belonged anywhere but here. The house was too quiet. She made coffee just to fill the silence. When the kettle whistled, Ryan stirred, blinking against the light. Morning, she murmured. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face. You didn't sleep. Neither did you. He gave a small, crooked smile. Guess we're both haunted. Emily tried to smile back, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to believe that whatever he'd done, it didn't define him. But the world outside didn't care about redemption stories. He watched her for a moment, then said softly, You're still afraid of me. She shook her head. I'm afraid for you. Something flickered behind his gaze, surprise, maybe even gratitude. But before either of them could speak again, a sharp sound shattered the quiet. A phone. Ryan's head snapped toward the counter, where Emily's old landline sat blinking. The sound was wrong, 3 short rings, pause, 2 quick tones. Not her ringtone. She frowned. That line's been disconnected for months. The ringing stopped. Then the voicemail clicked on. A man's voice filled the kitchen, cold, calm, deliberate. Dr. Hart, it said. You're harboring a fugitive. You have until sundown to decide if his life is worth your own. The line cut. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Ryan stood, one hand pressed to his side, the other gripping the counter hard enough to whiten his knuckles. They found the line, he muttered. They're tracing every contact in the area. Emily felt her stomach drop. How could they even know my name? He turned toward her, expression dark. Because Bennett's people have eyes everywhere. The moment you patched me up, they started digging. She backed away, the world tilting under her feet. You said you told the truth. What truth? What did you do to make them want you dead? He hesitated, then quietly, finally, he answered. Bennett runs more than money, he said. He runs people, judges, cops, politicians. Everyone owes him something. I helped him build that empire. I thought it was just business. But last year, I found out he was selling information, classified records, witness lists, names of people who were supposed to disappear under protection. Emily stared, unblinking. You were part of that? I was his fixer, Ryan said, voice rough. Until I couldn't be. So I copied the files, gave them to a contact inside the bureau. He paused. I thought it would end there. But it didn't. No, his eyes met hers. The contact was dirty. He sold me out. Bennett found out I talked. That's why they came for me. Emily's breath came shallow. So, now they think you still have the evidence. He nodded slowly. And if they think you've seen me, they'll come for me too. Silence fell like a curtain. Outside, the world looked unchanged. The same gray street, the same wet leaves on the pavement. But Emily could feel it. Something had shifted. Her safe little life had cracked open, and danger was bleeding through the seams. Ryan crossed to the window, scanning the neighborhood. His voice was low, almost apologetic. You should run. She shook her head. Run where? They already know my name. I can fix that, he said. There's a safe contact I can reach if I can get to a phone that isn't tapped. He owes me. You can't even walk straight, she snapped. You'll bleed out before you hit the street. He turned toward her, eyes sharp again.
You don't understand.
If I stay here, you die with me. The words hit harder than any gunshot. She wanted to scream, to throw him out, to rewind her life back to before the blood trail on the driveway. But when she looked at him, she saw the same thing she'd seen that first night, the humanity under the wreckage. You're not leaving, she said quietly. Not like this. Emily. No, her voice steadied. I don't abandon people when they're bleeding. That's not who I am. For the first time since she'd met him, Ryan looked uncertain. You really don't scare easy, do you? Terrified, she whispered. But I still stay. Something like respect softened his features, and for a brief moment the tension broke, just a flicker of shared warmth in a house full of ghosts. But fate doesn't wait for people to find comfort. A sharp pop split the air. The kitchen window cracked, then shattered. Emily screamed as the glass burst inward. Ryan lunged forward, pulling her down behind the counter. Another shot followed, punching a hole through the cupboard above them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They found us. Ryan grabbed her wrist. Stay low. He moved fast for someone half-healed, crawling to the hall closet. He tore the coat aside, found the pistol she'd hidden days earlier, and checked the magazine. They're not coming in to talk, he said grimly. They're here to finish it. Emily pressed her hands to her ears, trembling. The sound of footsteps on gravel echoed outside. How many? She whispered. 2, maybe 3. He looked toward the back of the house. We need to move. Where? The basement. There's a crawl space under the stairs, right? She nodded, breathless.
Go, he said. Now.
Emily hesitated. What about you? Ryan gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. You patched me up once. I can buy us time. Her chest tightened. You're going to get yourself killed. He looked at her gently. If it keeps you alive, that's fine by me. And that was when she realized it, the shift she hadn't wanted to name. Somewhere between the fear and the silence, between the blood and the lies, she'd started to care. She wanted to stop him, to say don't go, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she whispered, be careful. He nodded once, then slipped toward the back door like a shadow. The house fell silent again, except for her heartbeat, fast and desperate. She crouched in the narrow space under the stairs, every breath shallow. Through the crack in the wall she could see fragments of the yard, the glint of movement, the ghostly flicker of headlights turning slowly into her driveway. Her mind screamed one question, looping endlessly. What if this is how it ends? And then another voice, quieter, steadier, her own.
No.
I won't let it. Because when you've already chosen to save someone, you don't stop halfway through the fire. The house was too quiet.
Too still.
Emily crouched in the narrow crawl space under the stairs, her back pressed against the cold concrete, trying to silence her breathing. The shadows moved on the other side of the wall, slow, deliberate, patient. She could hear the men outside. Boots crunching over gravel, low voices trading short commands. They were close, scanning every inch of her yard. A pane of glass cracked somewhere above her. Her body flinched, every nerve on edge. And then silence again. The kind that presses against your chest until you start to doubt you're even alive. Ryan had gone through the back door 15 minutes ago. She hadn't heard him since. 15 minutes can feel like forever when you're waiting for someone who promised to come back. She'd saved his life once. Now he was somewhere out there trying to return the favor. She squeezed her eyes shut and whispered to herself, "Please, just come back." The words dissolved into the dark. A crash shattered the silence. Wood splintering. The back door giving way. Footsteps. Voices. They were inside. Emily pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. The men moved with military precision. One at the front, one sweeping the hall, another checking rooms. She caught fragments of their conversation. "He's bleeding bad. Boss wants the girl too. Don't leave anyone breathing." Her heart stopped. They knew she was here. Something shifted near the back of the house. A thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of struggle. Then, muffled shouts. A crash. Another. She could picture it, Ryan fighting them, outnumbered, wounded, refusing to fall. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden. But her conscience was louder. Because when you've already risked everything for someone, what's one more heartbeat of fear? Emily slid out of the crawl space, her movements slow and soundless. The hallway light flickered, power straining under the chaos. She grabbed the first thing she could reach, her father's old wrench from the basement shelf. The weight of it steadied her shaking hands. She crept toward the living room. The sight froze her. Ryan stood with his back to the wall, one arm braced against it for support, the other clutching the pistol. His breathing was ragged. Blood darkened his shirt again, fresh. Two men faced him from across the room, guns drawn. Emily couldn't breathe. One of them, tall, clean-cut, the kind of man who could blend into any crowd, took a step forward. His tone was calm, rehearsed. "Mr. Cole," he said, "you've caused enough trouble. Hand over what's left of the files, and maybe we'll let the girl walk." Ryan's voice came out low, controlled. "You and I both know there's no maybe in your deals." The man smirked. "Then you already know how this ends." Ryan fired first. The sound ripped through the air, deafening and final. The tall man dropped. The second dove for cover. Emily froze as Ryan stumbled forward, blood blooming through his shirt again. His gun fell from his hand, clattering to the floor. The second man turned toward him, weapon raised, and Emily didn't think. She didn't plan. She just moved. The wrench connected with a crack that reverberated through her arm. The man went down out cold. The silence that followed was unbearable. Ryan sagged to his knees, one hand pressed to his side. His skin was pale, his lips tight with pain. Emily ran to him, catching his shoulders before he hit the ground. "Ryan." Her voice broke. "Hey, stay with me." He tried to speak, but the words came out weak, fractured. "You shouldn't have." She shook her head violently, tears blurring her vision. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "Guess I owe you twice now." "Stop talking." She pressed her hands against the wound, but there was too much blood. The stitches had torn. Her breath hitched. "I can fix this. I can fix it again." He closed his eyes, voice a whisper. "Not this time." "No," she said fiercely. "You don't get to quit now." Her hands trembled, but she kept the pressure steady, refusing to let go. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard the shots. Ryan's breathing slowed. Emily, listen. Don't talk, she whispered. Please. He forced the words out anyway. In my jacket inside pocket, there's a drive. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face.
What?
Take it, he gasped. If they find me, get it to Agent Monroe.
He's clean.
He'll know what to do. Emily stared at him, panic and disbelief mixing in her chest. You're not dying on me. You hear me? I'm not losing anyone else. His hand found hers, weak but steady. His eyes, dark, fierce, alive, met hers. You saved me once. Maybe this time, I save you. Her throat tightened, words breaking apart before they reached her mouth. The sirens grew louder. The light from the street painted the room in flashes of red and blue. Ryan's grip loosened. His eyes fluttered closed. Emily screamed his name, shaking him, refusing to believe the stillness that followed. She pressed her forehead against his chest, sobbing. No, please. Don't leave me. Outside, the world roared with sirens and engines. Inside, time stood still. For a long moment, it was just her and the echo of everything she'd lost. And somewhere, beneath the grief, a small voice whispered, "This can't be the end." Because she'd promised herself once before that she wouldn't let death have the last word. And she wasn't about to start now. Sometimes life breaks you so completely that the only thing left to do is fight back. Even when it feels impossible. Even when you're alone. And if you were Emily, with the man you'd risked everything for fading in your arms, would you give up? Or would you find one last reason to try again? The sirens had faded, but their echo stayed trapped in Emily's ears. The paramedics had come and gone, leaving behind more questions than answers, more blood than closure. Ryan had been barely breathing when they carried him out. A pulse faint, erratic, but still a pulse. Now the house sat empty, crime scene tape fluttering against the doorway, the air thick with antiseptic and rain. Emily stood in the center of it all, shaking, her hands still stained. She should have felt relief that he was alive, but the silence around her felt heavier than death. She looked at the couch where he'd slept, at the dent his body left in the cushions, at the coffee mug half-finished on the table. Every detail screamed his absence. And then she saw it, his jacket. It lay crumpled beneath the overturned chair, half hidden in shadow. She knelt, fingers trembling as she reached into the inner pocket. A small black flash drive. No label, just metal and weight. The last thing he'd told her, if they find me, get it to Agent Monroe. She closed her fist around it. For a moment she stood there, frozen, torn between fear and fury. She could walk away, pretend none of this had touched her, let the authorities handle whatever mess he'd dragged her into. But she couldn't. Not after what she'd seen. Not after the look in his eyes when he said, "You saved me once." Because saving him wasn't about one night anymore. It was about finishing what he'd started. She drove into the city before dawn, headlights carving through the mist. Every turn of the wheel felt like a decision she couldn't take back. Downtown Portland looked ordinary at sunrise. Coffee shops opening, joggers passing, the world pretending it hadn't almost collapsed hours ago. She parked 3 blocks from the Bureau's field office and sat there for a long minute, the flash drive cold in her palm. Her reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, tired eyes, bruised heart, jaw set with quiet defiance. She whispered, "You told the truth, Ryan. Now I will too." And she stepped out into the light. Inside, the reception area smelled of paper and burnt coffee. A uniformed officer looked up as she approached. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I need to speak with Agent Monroe," she said. "It's about the Valant." She stopped herself. "It's about the Bennett investigation." The officer frowned. "And you are?" Someone who's done being quiet. He studied her for a beat, then picked up the phone. Within minutes, she was led into a small gray room. A man in his 40s entered, creased suit, tired eyes that missed nothing. Agent Monroe, he introduced himself. You said you had something? Emily placed the drive on the table between them. This belonged to Ryan Cole. He said you could be trusted. Monroe's expression shifted, just slightly. You've seen him? She nodded. He's alive.
Barely.
But they're still coming. He picked up the drive like it was radioactive. Do you know what's on this? Only that people have died for it. He met her gaze. If this is what I think it is, it's going to bring down half the city's power brokers. Then make it worth it, she whispered. He nodded once, solemn. We will. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, like the sky was breathing after a long scream. Emily stepped into it and finally let herself feel the weight of everything. The fear, the loss, the strange, impossible bond that had started with blood on concrete. She didn't know where Ryan was, or if he'd ever wake. But she knew what she had to do next. She went back home, ignoring the tape, the warning signs, the questions that would come. Inside, the air still held his scent. Gun oil, rain, and something faintly human. She sat on the floor beside the couch, staring at the empty space where he'd been. Her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. Her eyes burned from holding back tears. And for the first time in days, she let them fall. It wasn't weakness. It was release. Because grief, she realized, isn't the opposite of strength. It's proof that something mattered. She whispered into the quiet. You're not done yet, Ryan. You hear me? Neither of us is. Days passed. The news started to shift. Headlines about sealed indictments, corruption charges, arrests downtown. The Bennett organization collapsing from within. Emily watched the reports from her kitchen, the sound low, the coffee cold in her hands. She didn't need to hear names to know what she'd done had worked. One evening, as the sun bled out over the horizon, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, heart skipping. Then she answered, a familiar voice, faint but alive. You did it, didn't you? Her breath caught. Ryan. He laughed softly, hoarse and fragile. You gave them the drive. You're alive. Barely. A pause. They have me under protection. Monroe kept his word. Tears welled up before she could stop them. You should have told me you had a death wish before bleeding out in my garage. I didn't think I'd meet anyone stubborn enough to save me twice. The quiet between them stretched, warm and unspoken. He said softly, Emily, I don't know what happens next, but I know you changed everything. She smiled through the tears. Then maybe that's enough. That night, she sat on the porch with the phone still in her hand, listening to the crickets and the steady rhythm of rain on the roof. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about love in disguise, showing up for someone even when the world tells you not to. And she wondered, not for the first time, what anyone else would have done in her place. Would you have risked your life for a stranger? Would you have trusted your heart when every instinct said run? Because Emily Hart had done both, and it had saved more than one life. The porch light hummed above her, throwing a halo onto the rain-wet steps. Emily sat there long after the call ended, listening to the quiet between thunderclouds. Ryan was alive. That truth pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat she'd almost forgotten she had. But peace never lasts long for people who've touched darkness. 2 days later, a black SUV idled at the end of her street. No plates. No movement. Just waiting. Emily felt it before she saw it, the prickling sense of being watched. She pulled the curtains shut, heart pounding. The Bennett organization was supposed to be falling apart, but the kind of men who built empires out of fear didn't just disappear because of headlines. She called Monroe, straight to voicemail. When she finally reached him hours later, his voice was clipped. "They're scattering," he said. "Bennett's gone to ground. We're moving Ryan to a federal safe house." Her breath hitched. He still hurt. "You can't." "Dr. Hart," Monroe interrupted gently. "You've done enough. Stay inside. Let us finish this." But the line went dead before she could answer. She stood there, phone shaking in her hand, and felt the old helplessness creeping back in. The same helplessness she'd felt at her parents' funeral. The same helplessness she'd felt every time a patient died under her hands.
No.
Not again. She turned on the porch light, grabbed her keys, and drove. The safe house was an abandoned ranger station off Highway 26, hidden behind rows of pine. She'd overheard Monroe mention it once during the bureau briefing. By the time she reached it, dusk had turned the forest into shades of blue and black. Her headlights swept across the gravel drive and froze. Another SUV. Doors open. No agents in sight. The air felt wrong, too quiet, too heavy. Emily killed the engine and stepped out, every sound amplified. The click of the door, the whisper of wind through trees. Inside, the station smelled of dust and gun oil. Files scattered. Chairs overturned. And then, from somewhere in the back room, a voice. "Emily." Her heart lurched.
"Ryan."
He stood there, pale but upright, one arm in a sling, the other gripping a handgun. Relief flooded through her so fast it hurt. "What are you doing here?" he said. "You shouldn't have come." "You really need to stop saying that," she whispered. "Every time you do, something worse happens." He almost smiled, then his expression hardened. "They found us. Monroe's people got ambushed an hour ago. I pulled what I could from the files before they torched the servers, but Bennett's not done." "Where is he?" Ryan's eyes darkened.
"Here."
The word barely left his mouth before the door behind her slammed open. A silhouette filled the frame. Tall, broad, calm. Bennett. He looked older than the legend, silver hair slicked back, suit immaculate even in the chaos. The kind of man who smiled like the world was already his. "Ryan," he said smoothly, "you never could stay gone." Ryan raised the gun. "You should have stayed out of it, Bennett." "Out of it?" Bennett chuckled. "You stole from me. You tried to hand over my life's work to the feds. And now you've dragged this poor woman into it." His eyes slid to Emily, cold, assessing. "You must be the doctor." He has a type: rescuer, savior. How quaint. Emily's stomach twisted, but she stood her ground. "You hurt him once. You won't do it again." Bennett's smile didn't waver. "You think you can stop me?" Ryan moved in front of her. "She doesn't have to." "I will." The tension stretched thin as wire. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, like the world holding its breath. Bennett stepped closer. "You always thought you could change the game, Ryan. You never understood. You were the game." Ryan's grip tightened. "Not anymore." The next moments blurred into sound. Boots scuffing on concrete, a sudden rush of movement, the crack of a gunshot that made the walls shake. Then silence. When the ringing in her ears faded, Emily opened her eyes. Bennett lay on the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading through his pristine suit. His gun skittered away into the dark. Ryan stood over him, chest heaving, the weapon trembling in his hand. "You won't hurt anyone else," he said quietly. Bennett's laugh was ragged, disbelieving. "You think killing me changes anything? There's always another one of me." Ryan looked down at him, and his voice was almost gentle. "Maybe, but not today." He lowered the gun, stepped back, and turned to Emily. "Call Monroe." She nodded, fingers shaking as she dialed. Within minutes, sirens cut through the trees, real ones this time. Hours later, the station swarmed with agents. Bennett was taken into custody, cuffed and silent. Ryan sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a blanket around his shoulders, refusing treatment until they'd confirmed it was over. Emily stood beside him, arms wrapped around herself, watching the red and blue lights flicker across the pines. "It's done," Monroe said, stepping up beside them. "The files you recovered were enough. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars." Ryan nodded, but his eyes were somewhere else, out in the trees, chasing ghosts. When Monroe left, Emily sat down beside him.
Neither spoke for a long time.
The air smelled of rain and pine sap, of endings and beginnings tangled together. Finally, she whispered, "You could have walked away. You could have let him live." Ryan turned to her, voice low. "Then he'd have kept taking more. Sometimes mercy isn't kindness, it's permission." She looked at him, the man she'd met bleeding in her garage, and saw not the outlaw or the broken soldier, but someone who'd spent his whole life trying to make things right in all the wrong ways. He met her gaze. "You saved my life twice." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe this time you saved mine." They sat in silence as dawn broke through the trees. The light was soft, golden, almost forgiving. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in applause or absolution. Sometimes it just comes in surviving the night together. And if you were Emily, sitting beside the man who dragged you through fire and back into the morning, would you walk away now? Or would you stay to see what tomorrow looked like when the danger was finally gone? The night finally surrendered to morning. The last of the sirens faded down the mountain road, leaving behind only the hush of wind and the distant rush of the river. Emily sat on the back bumper of the ambulance while the medics packed up their gear. Her hands were wrapped in gauze, more from tremor than injury. Across from her, Ryan watched the light climb through the pines, the dawn gilding the side of his face. He looked exhausted, older, but alive. For the first time since she'd found him bleeding in her garage, the world around them wasn't holding its breath. She broke the silence. "So, this is what peace feels like." He turned to her, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Doesn't quite know what to do with itself, does it?" "Neither do I." They both laughed quietly, the sound awkward at first, then real. Monroe approached, nodding. "We'll keep him under protection until the trial. After that, he's a free man." He glanced at Emily. "You'll be contacted for testimony, Dr. Hart. Then I'd suggest a long vacation." When the agents left, the forest fell back into silence. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Ryan stood, slower than before but steadier. "You heard him. You're free to go back to your life." She looked at him, searching his face. "You think I can just go back? Pretend none of this happened?" He sighed, eyes softening. "You deserve normal. You deserve quiet mornings, not bullet holes." "And you?" He hesitated. "I'll figure out who I am when I'm not running anymore." Emily stepped closer. "Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone." That stopped him. The wind caught a strand of her hair, and he reached up without thinking, brushing it behind her ear. A simple, human gesture that felt heavier than any words they could find. "You'd really take that risk?" he asked quietly. "I already did," she said. "And it was worth it." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryan leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. No rush, no desperation, just the fragile calm of two people who'd earned the right to breathe again. When he pulled back, the smile he gave her was faint but real. "You saved my life." Emily smiled through tears. "You said that already." I didn't mean just the night in the garage, he said. I meant all of it. She shook her head. We saved each other. Weeks passed. The trial made headlines. Bennett's empire crumbled in courtrooms instead of back alleys. Reporters wanted her story, but Emily turned them all down. Some truths were meant to live quietly. She reopened the clinic, painted the waiting room, replaced the cracked tiles that still held faint traces of that terrible night. For the first time in years, she found herself humming while she worked. Sometimes, in the still hours before closing, she'd glance toward the window and half expect to see him there, leaning against his truck, watching with that faint, amused smile. And one evening, when the last appointment had gone home and the sun had dipped below the trees, she did. Ryan stood by the door, hands in his jacket pockets, a little less worn, a little more alive. You just going to stare, or are you going to come in? She called, heart already racing. He grinned. Didn't want to scare the dogs. You'd be surprised what they like. He stepped inside, the scent of rain following him. Monroe says I'm officially off the radar. New name, clean record, fresh start.
Good, she said.
You deserve it. He looked around the clinic, at the framed photos of rescued animals, at the soft light spilling across the floor. So do you. Then he met her eyes. I was thinking maybe that fresh start doesn't have to be alone. Her smile trembled. You sure you're ready for quiet mornings and vet bills? He nodded once. As long as they're ours. Emily crossed the room, closing the distance between them. She stopped just close enough for her fingers to brush his. The world outside faded. The rain, the fading daylight, the hum of the city. Welcome home, Ryan. He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath since the night she found him. Home, he echoed softly. And for the first time in a long time, both of them believed the word. The porch light at her house glowed again that night, steady and warm, not as a warning, but as a promise. Emily sat beside him on the steps, 2 mugs of coffee cooling between them. The world was quiet, healed in its own way. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or perfect timing. Sometimes it crawls bleeding into your life and asks for help. And you say yes, not knowing that single act will save you both. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you ever think about that night?
Every day, he said.
But now, when I do, it ends here. The rain began again, gentle and forgiving. And as the camera of the world pulled slowly back, from the porch, from the street, from the city, the last words of her narration carried softly into the night. Some stories don't end with goodbye. Some end with a heartbeat and a second chance. Sometimes, the people we're meant to save end up saving us instead. Emily and Ryan's story wasn't about crime or chaos. It was about finding love in the wreckage and hope in the silence. If you were Emily, would you have opened that garage door? Tell me what you think in the comments. Would you risk your heart for a stranger? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because sometimes, love begins where fear ends.